You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Welcome back to the 95 Podcast today, everyone. Obviously, this is not Austin talking. Today, we have such a special guest, and today was the day that they decided to work on the internet at Austin's house, and so he couldn't be on the interview today. And of all days, we have Carey Nieuwhof with us today. And Carey, he's kicking himself right now. I know he is, but thank you so much for being with us today.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Dale. And Austin, I get it. My internet has gone out from time to time too. It's
what a
unfortunate.
Day for that
I would have enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah. Well, he's the one who always, when Austin talks, people always say, "Oh, what a great question." So you probably won't say that to me today at all, but really the people, they want to hear you instead of hear me anyway. So what I'd love for you to do, first of all, everybody knows your name, but we speak specifically to small and mid-sized churches. And so I'd like for you to take a moment and just share your story, because you didn't get to where you are today overnight.
No. Well, I didn't even think I'd be in ministry. So, started out in law, was really interested in that. And partway through law school, pardon me, really had a call into ministry. Finished law, went to seminary, but really struggled with it. First of all, I didn't want to make a mistake. Right? Like, don't go into ministry if there are other options. Like, amen. And how do I know that was a voice of God? And there's enough Calvinist in me and Reformed in me to be suspicious of any supernatural. And that was definitely a supernatural call. So I went to seminary out of obedience. I thought I'd end up teaching, being a professor, because I didn't really have the gifting for pastoral ministry. But in the final year, before the final year of seminary, my wife and I were praying about it. And we said, why don't we try what we had in my denomination at the time, called it student charges. And there were just this smattering of small churches, often 2 or 3, that would band together. And they would rub all their nickels together and try to hire a student at half the price of a regular pastor. Yeah. So there were a bunch of them in the GTA, the Greater Toronto area. Tried a few, it didn't work out. Just they didn't want me, or it just didn't work out. And then we found one north of Toronto in a little place called Oro-Medonte, 3 little churches, and I would do the circuit on Sunday morning. And so I started there, and I won by 1 vote. They had a preach-off. And so, if it wasn't for good old Cora Bryan, she told me years later, she was the deciding vote. Yeah, it was like an overwhelming vote of confidence to have 49% of your church against you when you showed up there. And then, here's the other thing. They had the other guy who was a brilliant orator. Yeah. Because I couldn't make it until May. This happened in January of 95. I couldn't leave Toronto because I had commitments in the city until May. So they had the guy who lost come up and preach. And by the time I got here, I'm pretty sure if they took the vote again, I would have had 1 vote and he would have had all the others. So, but here we are 26 years later, and I still serve those people. And so that would eventually become Connexus Church. But talk about small, mid-sized church, like, everyone says, well, I lead a small church, and I've had small churches, but one of those churches on that circuit literally had an average attendance of 6. Wow. And at its lowest, I remember one day in February, there were 2 people in church. That's it. I showed up. It was a blizzard. My wife and kids stayed home, that Sunday because the weather was so bad. There were 2 people in church. So, what did you do?
Did you go ahead and do the regular service? Did you?
Yeah, I just pretended there were 20. Wow. What are you going to do? Like, you just keep going. And the mega church had 23. So all added together, there were 40 people on a Sunday morning adding all 3 churches together. And my predecessor was a great guy, very faithful guy, but he was like in his 80s. So I'm 30 and I come to these churches, and just, I think being 5 decades younger helped. So we started to grow. Yeah. And then, we went through all the stages. Within a few years, there were over 100, not 40, and then soon 200. And within the first 5 years, we sold all the buildings, which was really controversial, but we were outgrowing some of them. Yeah. And so I'm like, well, these were 100 years old. They're not big enough. They're not enough acreage. And, they were built in horse and buggy days. So it was a half hour to get to the different churches, but now it's 5 minutes because the car got invented, right? So I said, why don't we just amalgamate because we're all growing one way or the other. The church of 6 became a church of 30. The church of 14 was up to about 70. And then the one with 23 was about 130. I think by the time we sold the buildings, and then we amalgamated, went to an elementary school, and then we built a new building. And then that eventually morphed into what is now Connexus. Gotcha. So I led that for 20 years. We went through all the stages, from that handful of people to, hundreds, to a mid-sized church, and then to over 1,000 by the time I left in attendance. And probably 3,000 to 4,000 who called the church home, but it didn't start that way.
I want to go even further back. I want to know the young Carey before ministry and everything. What was it like growing up? Because you and we seem to have a lot in common, because you love the outdoors, and I love the stuff you post. I follow you on Instagram and stuff. And man, some of the pictures though. And also you love to grill. And so, I mean, it's like, so, what was it like being, a kid growing up? And you grew up in Canada. And again, most of our audience is in the US, but talk us a little bit about that. I just want to get to know what that was like for you growing up.
I was almost American. Actually, I'm a permanent resident. That's a long story for another day of the US, but I was almost American because I grew up right along the Detroit River in Windsor. So it was all American TV, American radio, blah, blah, blah. One of 4 kids, firstborn. My parents were immigrants. My mom came over as a girl from Holland. My dad came over as a 19-year-old. They met in Canada, but definitely part of that immigrant Dutch background. Was an okay student, didn't like school very much, particularly in elementary school. High school was fine, kind of, always kind of driven. By the time I was in high school, I was working in radio at the age of 16, DJing high school dances, got into journalism in my teen years, started writing a column that was syndicated very, very locally, like micro locally, was interested in politics, sensed a desire to become a lawyer when I was about 8 years old, but nothing too remarkable in my childhood. But just, actually high school, I kind of cruised through. I wasn't the best student. I hated
did
school.
You have any bent back then though toward ministry? Did you feel like
no?
It wasn't.
No,
in fact, when did you become a Christian? That was probably an important.
Well, I was raised in a Christian environment. Okay. When we were 10, we left the Windsor area. We were part of a Dutch church, and then we moved up to Midland, which is off one of the Great Lakes, Georgian Bay. Mm-hmm. And there weren't enough people for a Dutch church, so we became Presbyterian, and it was an evangelical Presbyterian church.
Oh, cool.
And my parents kind of went through a big conversion, and so I took my faith pretty seriously. Like, I probably first gave my life to Christ at 13. Mm-hmm. And then every time I sinned as a teenager, I recommitted my life to Christ. I went through that thing and was pretty serious about it. But in my late teens, drifted away, kind of lived a mainstream lifestyle. But at 21 or 22, I was like, okay, I either follow Jesus or I walk away.
Yeah.
And I recommitted my life to Christ. And, but again, thought of law, not ministry. Like to say, I had all kinds of things. I was going to be a lawyer. I could be an entrepreneur. My dad was running a business. I could do that. I had a career in radio if I wanted it. I had moved from my hometown to Toronto, and it was going really well in Toronto in radio. And they offered me like career positions. And no, I'm like, I'm going to be a lawyer. So that was it. And then it was between first and second year law that I really, God intervened.
Well, I can't go past that. So talk. You are definitely going into law. And now you're doing this. So what was that commitment in the South growing up? We say you surrendered to the ministry. So what was your surrendering thing like?
Well, it was like surprise. So I met my wife, my now wife. We were in the same section in first year law. I thought she was cute. I noticed her. I got to know her, wormed my way into a friendship. We started dating a few months later. And it was that summer between first and second year law. Went back to my then hometown in Midland off Georgian Bay. Worked at a good law firm where I thought there were some Christians there, like I could practice ethical law. Yeah. And one afternoon in August of that summer, I was sitting at a partner's desk. He was in court for the day, so I was just using his desk as office space. And I had this moment where I saw a vision of myself, not at 24, but at 44. And I was wildly successful and morally bankrupt. And it was a daydream. I was wide awake, but it was clear as day. And I'm like, oh man. And And the sense I got, it was like a supernatural moment. And I've had like half a dozen supernatural moments in my life. So I'm not the guy who like, the Lord told me what to eat for breakfast.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just ate breakfast. So I didn't make that spiritual,
Mhm.
you know, and I just thought, I knew in my spirit that law was not going to be my career.
Yeah.
And so I walked out of that office just deeply disoriented, went into the firm library, and they had a bay window, and I'm staring out of the bay window processing, what was that? What just happened? And I felt a prompting, and it said, look over there. So I looked down the road, and there was my church that I had spent the last 10 years, my home church.
Yeah.
And I felt a voice. I didn't hear a voice. I felt a voice that said, you should be in there. And the part of the church I could see was the pastor's study. I knew the building well enough.
Yeah.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? So left dazed and confused that day.
Wow.
My wife was working at a pharmacy because she was a pharmacist first, picked her up. We went back to dinner at my parents' place, and I didn't say a word to her. And we're driving to my parents' house, and she says, and we've been dating 8 months. This has never come up.
Yeah.
And she says, you ever thought about going into ministry? And I'm like,
Wow.
you'll never guess what happened to me at the office today.
Wow.
So that started a dialogue, left me really confused. I wanted to discount it.
Yeah.
But I kept going. I think wisdom has many counselors, kept going to my parents, and then pastor, and then presbytery, and other people I knew and trusted. And then I went back to my secular friends at college, and my faith was still, you know, marginal at that time.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I'm like, you'll never guess what happened to me this summer. Right. And they're like, what? I'm like, well, I think I should be in ministry, not law. And they're like, oh yeah, we can totally see that. And I'm like, you can't see that. There's no evidence in my lifestyle that would be true. And they're like, no, you'd totally be a great pastor. And I'm like, what? And so when it kept being confirmed, and then there were a series of other things that God just kind of showed me, I'm like, okay, I'll go out of obedience. But it's still surreal to me, because that was not my plan for my life.
It's a good thing that you said yes, because we're all benefiting from it.
Well, it's a very circuitous path.
Which kind of leads us into the fact, you know, you've written multiple books, but you have a brand new one out, and boy, does it speak to where we are right now. And I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the effects of the pandemic, because that horse has been beat a lot, but we you know, we need to talk about where we're going from here. And I think the timing of your new book is perfect. So walk us through a little bit about the new book.
Thank you.
And I mean, just what I've seen of it, I'm really, really impressed, and also going, you know, that's just right on point.
Well, it's an anti-burnout book, and we can ignore the pandemic because stress was a problem long before March of 2020. Yes. Pastors were burning out. Pastors were discouraged. Church leaders were struggling. And we actually started writing the book before the pandemic. So this was a 2 or 3 year project. And actually the material I've been working on for about 5 years. But it was just this condition I found myself in as a young pastor of, you know, I went through all the phases, like 100, 200, 300, 500. The hardest for me was between 500 and 800. That was brutal. Yeah. And the church is too big to really know everybody by name. Yet everybody still has pastoral expectations of you. Will you do the wedding? This person's in the hospital, blah, blah, blah. And I burned out. I hit a wall. And so long before the internet really became what it is today, I burned out. Like I didn't have a smartphone, and I burned out. Like, wow, it was just a home phone and a cell phone. And I managed to burn out by being overwhelmed. And that was 15 years ago. And on the other side of it, I just started rethinking how to spend my time, how to leverage energy, and how to avoid other people from hijacking my priorities. And that became the system that I've now written about in the book called At Your Best. And I started because I found that time, energy, and priorities were working against me. And I was in this stress spiral that most days before I burned out, I felt overwhelmed, overcommitted, and overworked. Wow. So on the other side, I figured out how to flip that. And of course, what's happened in the last decade is now everybody got there. Just about everybody feels overwhelmed, overcommitted, overworked. I don't know how to escape the stress spiral. Long before the pandemic, pastors were struggling with boundaries. You know, like honestly, in the 90s when I started, here was the tension. Do I get a work phone? Because the churches were so small, we didn't even have like a phone in the churches. They weren't even heated during the winter, except on Sundays. So I had to work from home.
Wow.
And so the debate with the elders, and I mean, we were dealing with tiny budgets. Like honestly, the church of six,
brother, I get it.
had a budget of $4,000 for the year, not the week, not the service, but for the year, $4,000. And so every expenditure was under the microscope. And I remember we had a big debate in 1998 because the church phone number ended with 1998. We picked that. So I'm 3 years into this. I don't think I've ever told this story. And it was, can we get a number for the church, even though I work from home? So I've been working from home for 25 years, 30 years, because there was no office. You're not going to work in a building with mice and, no heat. Like you're not going to do that.
Nope.
So I worked from the basement. And so we put in this work phone and home phone, because at dinner, the phone would ring. It'd be like, oh, Carey, I just thought I might catch you at dinner. It's like, well, I'm supposed to be with my family. And of course, if you're dealing with 50 people, that's not a big deal, but you're dealing with 500 and you've 10x the problem. Well, what leaders are dealing with today, Dale, is, that was a landline and a home phone.
Yes.
Now, I counted this up when I was writing this book. I have 11 inboxes. Every time I touch my phone, somebody is messaging me on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on
and can
TikTok.
I say something here before you?
Yeah.
You are so gracious, because anytime I have ever reached out to you, you always respond, and I want to say thank you for that, because so many people don't, and especially with this message you're giving, it means more to me. So thank you.
I appreciate that,
I really
and I find the best leaders do. Seth Godin endorsed the book. And the day before publication, he sent me just this quick 2-line note. And he said, your book looks great. Really excited for you in the launch, Seth.
Wow.
Well, Seth's one of the busiest people on the planet. How does he have time for that? Now, I will say we get hundreds of emails, maybe thousands of emails a week, just because of the size of audience. So those aren't always me. If you have my personal address, you will hear from me. But I hire people to treat every single response as though it matters. And right now that is scaled. But, if you're leading a small church, you don't have the benefit of staff. You don't have the benefit of all that. So 11 inboxes, it's crazy between public and private emails. And I feel for the average pastor, because, you probably have one phone and you're sitting there trying to watch Netflix with your wife or Disney Plus with your daughter. And you got church members texting you, and then you check Facebook just for fun, or Instagram. You got more DMs there. Did you know so-and-so's in the hospital? And it's like, no human is capable of helping that many people. It just like, you got 10 people. Sure, that works. You got 200, forget it. It doesn't work anymore. And that's what took me under.
So from a ministry perspective, you've been in ministry 40 years thereabout. Is that right?
No, I'm not that old. 26.
Okay.
And the last 6, I haven't been leading a church day to day.
Okay. So I've been in ministry, total ministry, for 40 years.
Gotcha.
And so I've had an opportunity, and I've worked with thousands of churches, because the first 10 years that Gina and I were married, we had a music group on the road. So we did about 1,100 concerts. So we were in all these churches. So this is something that I have observed and I have seen. Everything you've described that you experienced and have done that led to burnout is a normal story for most pastors, no matter what size their church. Why do we not model what Jesus modeled? Why do we not follow the model Jesus gave us in the Bible? Because he constantly was getting away. He modeled that for us. Where do you think the disconnect comes?
Yeah, I think that's a very layered question. So John Mark Comer spoke to that, right, with the ruthless elimination of hurry.
I read it.
Did a great job.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I have lots of conversation with John Mark. So I love the guy. And he is making such a valuable contribution. And John Mark has a very radical lifestyle. I talked to him like in the last month since we're recording this. And he now puts his phone to bed in the evening, like puts it away, and doesn't wake it up until 11 a.m. the next day. So he's trying to develop a semi-monastic way of life. That is John Mark.
Sure.
Like that is him to a T. That is not me. I'm more driven. I'm a lawyer. Remember, I'm not a monk. So like the lawyer hasn't really left me. And no, my phone wakes up with me in the morning. However, what I've found is you need boundaries. You absolutely need boundaries. And we're bad at them. And I think in terms of the layering of the question, I think there's a lot of us, and I would definitely be in this category, that like to be needed. It makes us feel important.
Yes.
It makes us feel like, oh, I need to be there. Well, again, when you have 30 people, I remember my first week, it was May of 1995. I was 30 years old and I wrote my message and I didn't know how to be a pastor. And I was at these 3 little churches. So I remember calling the chair of the elder board. I'm like, well, it's Tuesday. I'm done. I have 3 more days. What should I do? Literally, I had that conversation. That's how bad a pastor I was. I had that conversation.
I love it.
And he's like, well, you can come and visit some of us. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. So Wednesday, I went and visited people and figured out a circuit that I could do. And that worked. Sure. For 3 months. And then we started to grow and then it didn't work as well. And then it worked even less well. And then it worked less well. And then, and again, I didn't have 11 inboxes back then. Mm-hmm. So, but why? I mean, first of all, that is endemic to the job, particularly the small church pastor. Mm-hmm. But then as we got bigger, I had to figure out, okay, I don't need to care for everybody, but I have to create a church where everybody is cared for. That's right. That's a paradigm shift. Yeah. Okay. So how do we scale pastoral care? How do we scale this so it's not personality dependent, right? How do I make sure that the church does better when I'm gone than when I was there? Well, we managed to figure that out. It took me 2 decades, but we figured it out. And now it's working okay. The church is in even bigger and better than when I led it 6 years ago. So that's awesome. But, there is that insecurity often that I had to wrestle down, that I like to be liked. I need to be needed. I'm probably a recovering performance addict in my 30s.
I think we all are.
Yeah, I wanted my sermons to be the best sermons in the world. And what's so weird? I've spent thousands of hours writing and delivering sermons. And you can go on YouTube. They have 1,000 views. I think I have one that has 16,000 views. Maybe that's it. Most of them have a few hundred views. They never really went anywhere. Now, listen, a lot of people got baptized. We grew up, we saw God do some incredible stuff. But then I started leaning into this leadership stuff, and you write something in an hour and all of a sudden 50,000 people read it. It's like, whoa, what just happened? Yeah. You do a podcast interview, 100,000 people listen to it. It's like, whoa, okay. I put less into this than I did into that. What is going on? Well, that can be a sign of a call or whatever. But, it's so personality focused and so personality driven. Mm-hmm. I had to wean myself off of that. And that was a lot of therapy, a lot of prayer, a lot of counseling, a lot of coaching. And, what I'm trying to do right now and what I'm doing now, and I hope to rebrand my company at some point, but it's Carey Nieuwhof Communications. Well, how do we take the Carey Nieuwhof out of that and really build a team?
That's awesome.
And a group of leaders so that this isn't really about me. But I think there is a lot of insecurity, and insecurity actually presents as a need to be needed.
Well, you actually did an endorsement for the book that I wrote, and I'm always be grateful for you doing that. But so I have a special place in the book. So, I mean, my favorite part of the book. So when it comes to At Your Best, is there a place that you go, that's my sweet spot, or that's my favorite, chapter or idea? Is there something in the book that it just stands out to you personally that means more than maybe the rest?
Yeah, I would say the point that seems to have made the biggest difference in my life, and for those who have read the book, or I was able to train quite a few leaders in this system as I was developing it. So we've gotten a lot of real-time feedback, is probably energy management. Yeah, this radical idea that and I didn't know this for the first decade. I didn't know this, Dale, but that we have 3 to 5 productive hours in us a day. Yep. And brain research in the last decade seems to be confirming that. If you think about it, you have 24 equal hours in a day, but there's a difference between how I function at 7 a.m. and how I function at 7 p.m. Yep. So if I'm writing a book or I'm writing a sermon, my 7 a.m. stuff is just better than my 7 p.m. stuff. It's just true. Your energy waxes and wanes. Are you a morning person?
Absolutely. Dale? Absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of leaders are, but it doesn't there's no morning. I think there is magic to the morning, but if you're a night owl, maybe you're best between 8 and midnight. By that point, I want to go to bed.
Yeah, I'm done.
But I would say for all of us, we have our energy waxes and wanes and we don't think about it. So what happens is you're supposed to do some really important work. So we have mostly pastors listening to this. So guess what's really important? Your sermon's really important. The next series is really important. Your team alignment is really important. Crystal clear vision and culture is important. And eventually you need some money to keep the lights on and keep the doors open. True. So I found those 5 things when I was a lead pastor, and they shifted a bit slightly since I've been doing this, building into leaders over the last 6 years. But for the most part, those 5 things, if I spend time doing them, the church is pretty healthy. Yeah. If I neglect preaching, if I neglect crystal clear vision, a healthy culture, an aligned team, and financial margin, things start to go south. Usually not right away, but they will slide into that unhealthy direction. Now, the problem with those 5 things is nobody ever asks you to do them.
Yeah.
So what are you doing? It's Thursday night at 7:00. You haven't started your message. So now who's paying that price? Your family.
Your family.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Your family is, you are, your sleep is, your health is, because you had 17 emergencies that came up already that week.
Boy, you are preaching now.
Yeah. So the idea is, what is your best hour? So I'm 7 to 11 a.m. Guard those hours. Get your most important work done. For me, it's those 5 things. For a lot of pastors, it would be in that ballpark: aligned teams, crystal clear vision, excellent preaching, financial resources, and an aligned team, or whatever the 5 are.
Sure.
Right. Make sure that happens in that protected green zone. I divide the day into green, yellow, red. Green, your energy is at its peak. You're doing well. You're fresh. You got a good brain. Red, late in the afternoon, usually 4 to 6 for me. I'm a little more brain dead unless I really make sure I'm not. I'm tired. I need some caffeine. I need to go for a walk, a ride, something like that. And then yellow is everything in between. You're not at your best. You're not at your worst. But in that green zone, when you're at your peak, do those important things, because if the Sunday message is written by Tuesday, your Saturday is going to feel very different. So is your Thursday. Yeah. If the next season, I used to outline a whole year of preaching ahead of time. And then I would generally, when I was a lead pastor, be a month ahead, a series ahead. I'd be writing weeks in advance.
Very few people listening right now do that.
No, and I didn't for years. And it was always a scramble.
Yeah. And
you know what? My sermons got better. My messages got better. The team got to have time off.
Yeah.
And I did that by protecting those first hours. And don't knock on my door. I would turn my phone off or shut off all notifications. And I would just do that deep work that Cal Newport talks about. And then, if you emerge out of the hole at 11 a.m. and you've got, okay, now I got the strategy. I know what I'm going to say to the elders. I know how I'm going to present this building project. I've got that big stuff done. Then you can handle the meeting at 11 a.m. You can handle the call that came in at 2 going, oh, my marriage is not good. Okay, great. We'll come in Thursday afternoon at 3 and we'll talk about it for an hour. So when that was done, I was a much better leader. Yeah. And that seems to be the secret, because everybody talks about time management, but we don't think enough about energy management. Wow. Or we think, like I did in my 30s, no, I'm a robot. I'm superhuman. I can just keep going. And I didn't declare a finish line. So my body did. My body just said, that's it. I'm on strike. And I burned out. And see, the thing is, and you've hinted at this already, everybody looks for time off to heal us.
Yes. But
time off won't heal you when the problem is how you're spending your time on.
That's good.
Because you shared with me you had a really rough sabbatical this summer, and I'm so sorry, and I'm so grateful you made it out alive.
I'm glad to be here.
But even if you had the best summer, right? Let's say you took June, July, and August off, Dale, and it's amazing. You're at the beach, you're eating well, you're super healthy. You come back, you're like, I feel fantastic. And the first Monday back or Tuesday back after Labor Day, by 11 a.m., you feel like you got run over by a truck.
Absolutely.
What was that? That wasn't your time off. You knew how to take time off. That was time on. You are living at an unsustainable pace.
Yes.
And what I've discovered is, my unsustainable pace got me flatlined when we were about 700 people at church. Wow. And since then, I'd grown the church, I didn't grow the church, but the church grew under my leadership to over 1,000. And now leaders access my content 1.5 million times a month. Wow. And you know what? I got more time than I had in my 30s. I've got more time for friends, more time for exercise. I try to find margin spiritually, emotionally, relationally, physically, and financially. So I'm in way better shape than I was 20 years ago in my 30s. Wow. My friendships are richer and deeper. We had a 6-hour dinner with friends Sunday night. That's incredible.
Wow, that's so much fun.
Oh, it's so good. I went for a bike ride at lunch today. I got my article written for my website tomorrow, got the email done.
Isn't that fun when you get it done?
Yeah, it's just done. And then you're like, I can go for an hour, because I had 3 interviews this afternoon and I got a dinner tonight. But, you kind of work that in. So, and you can do that, because everyone thinks, I'm so busy. And I had this aha moment like years ago, probably coming out of burnout, where I thought, the person who seems to have the most time in the world, the person who's running the most complicated church in the world or biggest church in the world or the biggest company in the world, they have 24 hours in a day. If I can't manage it running what I'm running, what hope is there for me? So that really forced me to rethink. I've got the time. How do I use it? So it's time, energy, and priorities. When I made changes in those departments and I shared the strategy and At Your Best, that's where I started to see and I don't want this to be an exaggeration. We debated this language, exponential returns. Like that's where, I'm healthier than I've ever been. The impact is broader than it's ever been. And I have a better marriage. I'm a better dad, even though my kids are in their 20s. And my team is healthier and I have more time for the people that are closest to me.
That's so good. Before I run out of time, for me, the thing you teed up, you just teed it up with what you said that got my attention the most was looking. And you said, if you look in the future, I'm not wording it the way you did, but if you look at your calendar in the future and it's blank, that's not good. Well, see, that's counter to the way we're all wired. You got to dive into that before we run out of time.
Oh yeah. Okay. So when is this episode airing? Do you know, Dale?
It'll be it's going to be our 100th episode. We just aired our 95th. So it'll be in 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Okay. So it'll be October.
Yes.
All right. I want you to look at the second week of December. What does it look like? Oh no, let's not pick December. It's pastors. Okay. You got Christmas anxieties. Look at the third week of February. It looks amazing. It's probably empty right now. You got nothing going on. You're like, oh, if I get to February, it'll be great. Well, guess what? That's what you thought about October and July. If I can just get to October, it's going to be awesome. And what happened to your blank calendar between July and October? It filled up. And on the weekend, as you're listening to this, you thought, oh, I've got a pretty good week. And it filled up because so-and-so was in crisis and this person's in the hospital and this board member needs to see you and this staff member is going, crazy. And you still didn't get your message done. So now you're living at this insane pace. So you're right. Blank space on your calendar is a trap. It looks like freedom, but it's jail disguised as liberty. So in the book, if you get the book, you can get this for free. It's all included. You can download a calendar for your phone. And in it, I encourage you to pre-decide how you're going to spend your time. Because if you don't decide how you're going to spend your time, everybody's going to decide for you. So every day you overlay green, yellow, red. And this isn't task management. You can do that in Asana, Basecamp, Notes, however you want. But you just if you look at my calendar, Monday morning says writing from 7 to 11 a.m. Tuesday morning says writing. Today's a Tuesday when we're recording this. I didn't have my first meeting until 2:00. It was a great day, but we decided that ahead of time. Wednesday morning, I don't have my first meeting until 11 a.m. What am I doing? I'm protecting my green zone. I'm making sure that writing gets done. And because of what I do, when I was a pastor, this was true as well. Sunday comes around with surprising regularity. So you're probably going to have to prepare for it. This is not a shock. Okay. But the message is always the leftovers. And then if you really want to get good, Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers, which is still on the New York Times bestsellers list 13 years later.
Wow.
Talks about the 10,000 hour rule and how you become world-class at something. So if you want to become a better preacher or you want to become a better communicator or thinker, don't just write your message. Study great communication. Read a book about better preaching. Go onto YouTube and go study how some of your favorite preachers are doing it. Toss around an idea. This book was a labor of love and a labor of hate. I should have been able to write this because I did a course on this in 2016 that I released. I'm like, oh, this will be an easy book. It was murder because it's my life message. And it went through about 8 drafts. And it wasn't that I didn't have the content. I had the content. I didn't have the right expression of it. And so I started to rethink it and rethink it and rethink it. And 8 drafts and multiple hands later, I was saying to Tony, as we record this, the book's been out a week and we're getting messages every day from people talking about green zone, yellow zone, red zone, the Thrive calendar, and they're getting very specific into application. And I'm like, holy cow, I can't believe how quickly people are adapting to the message. They're adopting it in their lives, using it, seeing immediate results. But I also know if I had shipped the first draft, and it's the best-selling book I've ever done, if I had shipped the first draft, first of all, Seth Godin probably wouldn't have endorsed it.
Yeah.
Neither would Adam Grant. They would have been like, "Oh, nice. Thanks for trying. We really appreciate it. Yeah, maybe another time."
Yeah.
And the message wouldn't have resonated because the ideas were there, but the expression needed blood, sweat, and tears.
And some pain.
So, and pain. I'll tell you,
when I wrote Stalled, it was like, oh God, I gotta relive all this again. But it's to help somebody.
I wrote an email. I had a really bad day in August of 2020, not related to the pandemic, but I was looking at the book and all I thought is, how do I tell Penguin I want to buy back the rights, give them their money back? And like, I'm done. I can't write this book. And I sent a note to my agent and I'm like, that's it. Get me out of this contract. It's a disaster. I'm not doing this. And I wanted to quit. And I'd been through like 5 drafts and I knew it wasn't right. And I was getting, golf claps from people going, oh, it'll be a good book. But I'm like, no, it's not right. And then next day, it all started to flow. But that was draft 7. And then it went through another. And then it went through 8. Now I look at it and I'm like, okay, that was the expression that this book needed to be. But it didn't. And I've been communicating my whole life.
Yeah.
Like, if you wing it, here's the challenge with preachers, right? If you pull that Saturday afternoon special together, you're a gifted communicator and your church probably won't know it. Somebody will probably come up and say, that really spoke to me. Thank you so much. But you know what you're doing? You're cheating your gift. You're using your gift, but you're never developing it because you'll never get any better than you're winging it. So what you need to do is you need to go through the second draft and the third draft and the fourth draft and get some other eyes on it. And you can't do this every week. But I mean, if you spend an hour a week or an hour a day getting better as a communicator, great things will happen. I interviewed John Mark Comer recently. He's 41. And I read his new book, Live No Lies, and started messaging him going, dude, this is a killer book. And what got me was the footnotes. And I'm like, at 41, like you can research for a book, you can cram for your next series, but he has spent over a decade spending an hour or 2 a day just reading widely in theology, in the church fathers and mothers, in the monastic order. And it's like putting $50 into the bank starting when you were 19 years old. By the time you're 29, it's like, well, that's fine. I got a little bit of money. By the time you're 60, that's a lot of money. You're rich, right? If you've done that every week. And he has done that. And he's become like a world-class thinker at 41. And it started with what's that?
I said his book rocked my world for sure.
It's incredible.
It was incredible. Yeah.
And, I said to him, John Mark, I can't wait till you're 60, dude. I hope I live that long because I want to see what happens. Like this is just going to compound. So best time to start that was 5 years ago. Second best time to start that is today. Yes. So what if next week you sat down, you protected your green zone, you started your message early, you got those big, important vision things done, and you spent a half hour reading a book on theology or preaching or better communication or vision or whatever is really going to help you become a better leader. And you just do that for a half hour or an hour a day, 5 days a week for 10 years and watch out. Like your leadership is going to grow. And I think that's the secret for a lot of people.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us. We're speaking to hundreds of small church pastors all across the country. And I love the fact that they get to see your heart. They get to see that you're a real person and that you paid a lot of dues to get to where you are. And the Lord's still working in your life. And so what I'd love for you to do is we always like to wrap up our podcast by asking you to address this thing. What is one word of encouragement or just blessing or insight you'd like to give to our pastors right now? And again, I know this time we will say this specifically going through the season they're in right now. What would you say to them if you were talking to them personally?
I would say you need to find a sustainable pace. And there is a way to do it. This is not some like stupid little formula or trick or whatever, but there is a way to accomplish less or accomplish more and work less. And, the 70, 80, 90 hours a week, it's just not sustainable. And I know when our church was growing and it was growing, I used to pretend that winning at work meant I could lose at home. And I've changed my mind on that if you're winning at work and losing at home, I'm losing, period. So in about an hour, my wife's going to walk through the door. She was out. She's not going to be mad at me, even though we've been through a really, full season. Book launch is a full season. We had date night last Friday night. We have invested in our marriage because it was hanging by a thread when I was in my 30s. And you got to figure out, like, if this is a long obedience in the same direction, you've got to figure out how to live at a sustainable pace, because time off won't heal you when the problem is how you're spending your time on. So let's work together to figure out a new way to spend your time on. That's my heart for you. And if you do that, you're going to be more joyful at 60 than you were at 40. You're going to be more joyful at 70 than you were at 50. And God is going to take care of the results. Like, don't worry about it.
So good. A joyful pastor and a joyful church actually would be more attractional if you think about it. We won't go into that right now. We won't go into that right now. Thank you.
Well, otherwise
so
your
much.
inner core gets rotten, right?
Yes,
There's so many bodies flying everywhere. The people closest to you should have the best experience of you.
Why would people want to be like us if we're mean and we're tired and we're just, you don't say that we need to have that attraction. Thank you so much. We could talk for hours, but thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, for the encouragement you brought to the pastors, for the encouragement you are to me. I feel like you're my friend, even though we've, you're there and I'm here, but I just thank you.
Well, thank you, Dale. And thank you for all you're doing. Austin, we missed you today.
Yeah, we did.
I hope the internet comes back.
Yeah. So you can hear our interview. So thank you so much. And your book, we'll put the link to your book in the show notes.
Sure.
But At Your Best is our goal for everybody. We want them to experience it. So again, Carey, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Dale.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.